The flow of quantum technology has swelled to a tidal wave. What seemed like science fiction is nearly within reach. This new reality creates infinite possibilities and will change the way we process data forever. But the wave of quantum breakthroughs will also sweep away encryption as we know it. The time for action is now. This is how we enable a quantum-safe future.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. Well, welcome to our first Quantum Safe Summit. As you all know, that the combination of quantum and AI allows encryption to be broken much faster. Now, as you know, quantum is going to solve problems much faster than we have been able to solve with most computers today. But the challenge we have is that as that compute power comes online, it is going to be able to decrypt and break encryption keys across the board. And the problem is that if that's true, we need to start thinking about how do we solve the cryptography problem today. So what you're going to hear from our team today is how is Palo Alto enabling this quantum safe future. Now, it's not just about Palo Alto enabling this. We have a series of amazing experts who are going to join you today. They're going to come talk about how do they see the future, how is that going to work. Now, as they tell you, I think the whole point of getting them up there is to try and make sure you understand that this is real. It's going to show up in short order in front of us. There's an interesting conversation going on lately. It's called Harvest Now, Decrypt Later, as in you can collect the data today, and when quantum compute is ready, you can decrypt that data to find out what actually lies in there. So things like IP, if you can get access to IP or strategic data or classified data, hold on to it and be able to break it with a computer that has come out of the lab. It still may not be for production, but it can be used for very sensitive tasks. You conceptually have a risk that a lot of the stuff is going to expose nation states. We cannot wait until the first Q day to act. To be ready for tomorrow, we must be secure today. I'm delighted that you guys are able to join us. Have a wonderful summit, have a wonderful time, and hopefully if Palo Alto can help you in any which way, you know where to find us. Thank you once again. Have a great day.
Hey, Aziz Caraval from ZK Research here, and I'm joined by Will Townsend from Lone Star Advisory and Research, also co-host of the What's New in Security podcast. Will, we're going to be watching this Quantum Summit and making some comments through it, and tell people what they're going to hear here.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about, crypto discovery, crypto agility, the need for a platform approach to ensure quantum safe security. So, and we're going to hear from a lot of exciting, speakers, a Nobel laureate, NIST, and obviously from the Palo Alto Networks team. So I think it's going to be an action-packed agenda.
Yeah, and I think if you're an IT leader, CISO, or anybody interested in quantum, this is a must watch. I think Will and I are going to take a shot at guessing some timelines, talking a little bit about the need for some silicon. And I think this will really help, I think, the watchers understand, when to start getting concerned with quantum, which is frankly now, and some of the things to do to get started.
For sure. And our colleague Francis couldn't make the recording with you and I, but the team has recorded some video with Francis, and that'll be interspersed throughout the discussion today as well. Yeah. But let's listen to Anand here and see what he has to say.
Yeah. I do think one of the points that I hear all the time, though, when Nikesh said about data stolen today can be decrypted 5 to 10 years later, there's a lot of debate in the industry of the time value of data itself, right? Like, not all data will be useful 5 to 10 years from now. However, I do think it's important organizations think about what data they have that needs to stay secret for that 5 to 10 year time frame, because every company's got some data in that regard. It just, it's not all the data.
Yeah. But, I think also it's the amount of data as well, right? And I think one of the biggest challenges is discovery and really understanding, the expanse of, your crypto assets, right? And that's something that that was addressed on the live stream as well. But hey, buddy, I've got a question for you. I mean, there's a lot of debate about when are we going to, finally get to, a full quantum computer? 5 years, 10 years? Are you willing to place a bet on when we might see that happen?
Well, we have some elements of it now, and I'm curious to hear. Let's hear what these guys say about when the time frame is, and we can debate that as we go through.
Okay,
We've been working
cool.
with Moderna to look at optimization of some of their mRNA sequencing. And we've been working with HSBC, right? And so for this in the finance area where they're looking at optimal bond trading strategies as an example. So actually, across a number of different industry verticals, you're starting to see this adoption, right? And really getting in early to learn what's possible. And also really to push the envelope of what can be done with these beyond your classical computational platforms.
It's great to
Yeah,
see
so I
adoption
think this
across
is
multiple.
what Jerry's comments here are worth kind of an additional deep dive here. He does mention, so to your question, it's a good one, right? When are we going to have it?
Yeah.
Jerry mentions Boeing, Moderna, HSBC already using it, right? So
Yeah.
quantum isn't just about breaking keys and, it's not some future thing. It's actually already being used for massive breakthroughs in physics and biology. It's not, ubiquitous, like cloud computing is today, but
Right.
I do think it's a great counter argument for the skeptics. As Jerry mentioned, Boeing's being used, is using quantum for material corrosion, Moderna for mRNA sequencing. It's become a tool for innovation, before it becomes a tool for decryption, which I think is important.
Yeah.
So I think the good guys might be using it before, or at
The
least
bad
on par with the bad guys. So.
Yeah, I think so too. And the potential is profound, right? When you talk about drug discovery and that sort of thing. And like, could we see a cure for cancer? I mean, it's amazing, but at the same time, AI, I think, Nikesh said this pretty eloquently, is accelerating, I think, where we're going to head with it. So like, I'll answer that on my, that question. Is it 5 years out? Is it 10 years from now? Out from now? I think it's going to be within the next decade as well. And AI is going to be a force multiplier. But the good guys are going to have to use AI because you can't manually inventory this and remediate this. You're going to have to use AI. So it's almost like spy versus spy, AI for good and AI for bad. Hey, Francis, let's have you weigh in on that particular topic.
Yeah, I really do agree with Will and see here there's huge potential for quantum to really transform the world, from drug discovery as we just talked about, or even just in general, in terms of the massive breakthroughs we could have in technology more broadly. But I think even just to build upon some of those comments as well, I do think even in cybersecurity, I genuinely think there's huge capabilities here that we have with quantum as it relates to cryptographic computing. I do think this is going to significantly change how enterprises think about having more of an enterprise-wide um, infrastructure exposure and orchestration security across their enterprises. So I do think there's huge potential even from a security side of things. But as you've all mentioned, I do agree. It is going to take us time. There has been progress being made, but it still feels like there is going to take us a bit of time for a broader set adoption. But I just wanted to re-echo some of the major breakthroughs we could see society-wise. And I actually think we've seen some of these already, but even in a security context, there's much more that could be done globally.
IBM recently introduced the Nighthawk processor, IBM's most advanced quantum processor to date, designed to support the scale and complexity needed for these early demonstrations of quantum advantage this year. Now, looking at your roadmap, and you've promised IBM Starling, right? A large-scale fault-tolerant system in, I think, 4 years, 2029. Let's talk about what it means for security. Once a quantum computer reaches a certain scale and stability, it can break RSA and ECC encryption that we use today. Given the specifications of the Starling processor, that's 200 logical qubits, right? And the model design of the IBM quantum system, too. What does this mean for security? Like, how are we thinking about that?
That was a great question to ask there too, because I think security is certainly on the minds of many people, right? Especially as we're talking about quantum computing. Of course, with the systems today, we're really just pushing the envelope in terms of exploring science. With the logical qubit machines, with the fault-tolerant machines that we're planning with Starling at 200 logical qubits, and then ultimately Blue Jay 2,000 logical qubits in 2033, we're really getting into that fault-tolerant regime, right?
And
Where,
notice, Will, they're
a lot of
actually
the kind
saying
of
they're not saying if,
proven
they're saying
advantages
when.
that people have
When.
Right, so
introduced
there's
in
a literal
algorithms are really going to
time frame.
become
Starling
tangible.
is
Now, of course, from a
2029, and
perspective
then I
of
think
breaking
20
encryption,
was it
you
only
actually
3 years
need
after that he'd have Blue Jay
a similar
processing,
number
right?
of
So
qubits to the
Yeah.
bits that you need.
and so I think that there it supports your statement of within the next decade. And an interesting detail here: you don't need 1,000,000 qubits to start being a threat, right? Resource estimates for breaking RSA are constantly dropping, and so these quantum processes that are coming, I think, certainly have to be paid attention to from a security perspective.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, my friend. And yeah, when you sort of look at encryption schemes, and I think we're going to get into crypto agility, so I don't want to steal the thunder there, but you're going to have to factor, NIST is on this, but you're going to have to like have an agile, approach that factors for evolving the standards as well as algorithms to keep up, right? Because the bad guys are going to be leaning into AI to scale what they're doing.
And all these types of encryption breaking schemes. And so somewhere in the middle, it's going to happen. And I think the main key is to be ahead of that.
Yeah, wonderful. Jerry, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us, sharing with us all your insights and the amazing work you're driving at IBM Research. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, in fact, at IBM Thing last year, Arvind talked a lot about quantum. So, it's something that IBM's making a big push in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly IBM has proven their leadership in that space, just the investments they've made and, the breakthroughs that they've made as well over the years.
Co-founder and Chief Technology Officer of CoLab, a quantum computing startup, and winner of the 2025 Nobel Prize in Physics. John, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So, looking back 40 years ago, mid-80s, you're at University of California, Berkeley, graduate student. You're doing some work with John Clark and Michel Devoret. And, ultimately that work that you performed, which proved some quantum mechanical properties at a more macroscopic scale, is what resulted in the Nobel Prize. Looking back over the last 40 years of work in evolution in quantum technology, what has surprised you most about the way things have transpired?
Well, it started out as a very academic project just to show that you can see quantum mechanics in an electrical circuit, a macroscopic circuit. And that was a really interesting observation at the time. But it's really been the combined work of many people around the world taking that initial experiment and doing more and more sophisticated experiments, showing more and more quantum physics. It was very much motivated by the idea of building a quantum computer, which was actually around the 1985, 1986.
Z, the analogy
ideas
that
were
I think
around, but they
this
got
speaks to
developed over
this
the
is the
years.
internet,
And there
right?
was some
And how the
fundamental
internet was
differences.
originally created for academia, and then basically it evolved, and it has completely transformed and changed, how we transact business, how software is delivered, how we, conduct, e-commerce. And so I love the parallels between sort of the origins of the internet and the origins of quantum computing.
I was actually using the internet in '84 in academia. So
Were you? Yeah.
Yeah.
I do remember I was at Dell. I was pretty early in my career, and when it was like towards the end of the 90s, when it just revolutionized what we were doing at Dell and created Dell.com, and it's been fun, man. You and I have lived through the internet, cloud computing, and now modern AI and quantum. Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's cool they have a Nobel Prize winner as part of their panel, though. So
yeah, no, it's incredible, and I think he spent some time at Google as well, and so much innovation, and you look at what Google is doing now with Gemini and with respect to AI, and it's pretty exciting.
Powerfully faster than what you can with a big data center computer. So it shows the power of a quantum computer. But now people are looking at more practical problems, trying to solve that and make a useful quantum computer out of it.
A lot of the people watching this video are cybersecurity professionals, right? They're people tasked with protecting the world's data, for some of the largest organizations, both the public sector and the private sector. Is it that general purpose quantum computer that we're waiting for that's going to mark what some people refer to as Q-Day, or could this threat potentially happen sooner than that million qubit computer?
Well, it's hard to predict the future and if people will have any new ideas out there to do that. But generally, people think that if you want to, break RSA, for example, you need to know how to factor numbers efficiently. That comes from a general purpose error-corrected quantum computer that's roughly 1,000,000 qubits. So it's a lot of details that, I'm ignoring here. It could be more, it could be less. But, people are around 100 qubits or so right now. So you can get a sense that
Yeah,
it
that's
could
pretty
go
amazing. So
there,
that gives
but,
us a
we
feel for
still
the
have
scale,
ways
right,
to
Z?
go.
So if we're at
Yeah.
100
What I
now,
would say
we've got to
in
get to
terms
a
of the
million.
threat is that
Yeah,
there's a
I
lot
mean,
of new
is it longer than 10 years? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a Nobel Prize winner, so I'm not gonna try
Yeah,
to
but you
place.
can start to build code more efficiently though, and you could probably do with 100 qubits what you need 1,000,000 for right now, right? So
Yeah,
I do like his quote though. I would hate for quantum computing to be known as breaking the internet. I think it's interesting that we have a Nobel Prize winner here saying we have time to do this properly, but not infinite time, right? So he talks
right.
about Q-Day. But I do think it's a call to arms for us to be the ones, who fix it before it breaks. And I think I did like his comment there. So
Yeah, no, I did too. And
yeah,
you commented earlier on Harvest Now, decrypt later, and you're right. I mean, a lot of data, probably won't be useful, 10 years from now, but unless enterprises, organizations discover and do the inventory and understand what their expanse is, it's an unmitigated risk, right? So
yeah,
I believe that this year, and I applaud Palo Alto Networks for raising the awareness on quantum security. 2026, I think, is going to be the rally year for ensuring as an organization that you properly at least started with an inventory of your crypto asset expanse, because that's the first step. You have to understand what you're trying to manage before you can protect it, adapt, and then accelerate your cybersecurity coverage. Hey, Francis, what are your thoughts?
Yes, so I do agree. Yes, harvest now, decrypt later. Just building upon what has been talked about. I really do think, yes, I really do agree with the discovery point. For every other security solution, you need very, very good foundational inventory. You need the ability to be able to discover everything that you do have within your enterprise. This is enterprise-wide asset discovery. Whether you're using agentless firewall telemetry or even just capturing all of your cryptographic ciphers, certificates, session metadata, or even third-party firewall data ingestion. You need that first visibility to even get you into any state of readiness. And I do think some of what Palo Alto has with Strata Cloud Manager, tracking PQC supported hardware is one way, and then some of the other mechanisms around deploy, protect. I do think that's a way in which we could actually help to solve um, for this harvest now, decrypt later, and getting organizations, generally ready, for what quantum has to actually add to their enterprise in general. And I do think the last thing I'll just say from a CISO dilemma side of things too is, you need to protect today's data from future decryption, and I think that's something a lot of, for many enterprises, face early adopter risk because of maybe immature standards, or even just the performance overhead in general. So I do really echo, I really like the idea. And I do think this harvest now decrypt later, it's not just a future threat, it's actually a present day attack with a lot of delayed fuse payload. And I think this is something we need to think, and to some of the points mentioned, I do really agree that thank you to Palo Alto Networks, for even raising awareness and bringing up the conversation, because this is not something we even talk about as an analyst firm. We don't hear a lot of other ecosystem partners speaking about and raising as much awareness about this.
The National Institute of Standards and Technology. Thanks for joining me here today.
Oh, glad to be here talking with you, Michael.
So, Dustin, you are a mathematician and leader within the Cryptographic Technology Group at NIST. Can you
How
give
many
us a
security
sense of
clearances do you
what
think
that
this
role
guy has?
entails?
Z?
Yeah, no,
Yeah. Well, he's the guy setting all the standards, right? So
Right.
there's a
Yeah.
huge number of different areas. Our particular group is working on cryptography and making sure that we have secure standards for organizations to use.
I think
The
NIST
project
just
that I've been
continues to
involved
do
with
an
for the
excellent
past couple
job
of
of,
years
helping to set standards. They're responsible for, helping, create the zero trust framework. And there's just so much good that comes out of that organization. And I don't, I mean, obviously, we're close to it because we are, we're industry analysts and we cover this space, but I don't think the general public understands just how instrumental NIST has been in just, ensuring, our national security.
Yeah. I think NIST had set some federal deadlines, right? I think 2035. That certainly government deadlines and mandates. You would, in fact, what'll be interesting to see is other regions, particularly in the Middle East, get involved with it in China. Will we
Yeah.
accelerate those, forward roll those timelines? I would think so.
I would think so too. I mean,
Yeah.
and when you look at, again, to your point, what's happening in the Middle East, I mean, those AI data centers are they're being built with a lot of NVIDIA, a lot of AMD, a lot of, US infrastructure, right? And so you would think that would have to, also, sort of follow geographies as well. And then you've got sovereign, I mean, there's so many factors that are coming to play here with cryptography and AI and and just in the data that's used with all of this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and so you're mentioning algorithms being needed potentially. As people are building systems today, do you have recommendations between should they just swap out the encryption they have, put in the PQC recommendation and move on, or should they build in a way that's more flexible for the future? And if so, why?
Exactly. And there's a term given to that notion. It's called crypto agility.
Yeah.
The idea that you can
Yeah.
easily switch out your cryptographic algorithms that you're using today. We are going to need to transition to PQC. Is this going to be the last transition? No, we're going to need to switch to something else at some point. So it makes a lot of sense to build in flexibility, to have crypto agility while you're doing this and have that future idea in mind that we're not going to be using these forever. We're going to need to do another switch. So anything that you can
See,
do
I'd like to
along the
get
way
your
to
thoughts
make
on
that
this.
easier for the
I
future.
think
Yeah,
this
I think this is worth a little bit deeper discussion here.
Yeah, let's pause this. And so when I think about crypto agility, it's like, it's ensuring that you're factoring for evolving the standards and algorithms, it's incorporating a phased migration. But I'd like to get your opinion on this. I think it's also going to be a catalyst for organizations to modernize legacy infrastructure at the same time. So it's kind of, you're kind of killing two birds with one stone, but would love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, there's two sides to this. First of all, I do think crypto agility is incredibly important. In fact, you could argue it's the new must-have for the tech stack, right? You think about even AI, the ability to swap models, allowed the world of AI to kind of explode, and I would expect the same thing here. I do think the modernization piece of it, though, Dustin did mention as a first step, though, having a cryptographic inventory.
Yeah,
You can't pretend, right? And so you have to know what you have in order to be able to modernize, to know where you want to go, right? And this is kind of the age-old problem of modernization. A lot of companies don't know what their starting point is, and so if you don't have a good starting point, it's hard to pin down the finish line. But I do think I'm glad this got brought up by Paolo, because I don't hear crypto agility being talked about a whole lot, but I do think it's it's very important. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other opportunity here is to highlight what Paolo has been, very good at, which is, delivering platform. But at the end of the day, their platform approach has proven to be very successful, just sort of, when you look at traditional cybersecurity. And when you start thinking about, quantum safe, there needs to be a reimagination of how you approach the platform. And to your point, it's about discovery. It's about protection. It's about adaptation, being able to adapt, to a changing threat landscape. And then it's using all of that in concert to drive, better security outcomes at the end of the day. Because, I mean, this is so, it's so nascent. I mean, we're just getting into the thick of post-quantum security. But it's a risk mitigation, right? And organizations are going to have to, take measures to ensure that they protect their, their
Actually,
assets.
it'd be interesting to see, you brought up the P word, platform, right? So
Yeah.
Palo has they have their NG firewall platform, the SASE platform. They bought CyberArk. They have an identity platform.
Yeah.
I'll be curious to see when and if Nikesh adds the old quantum security
Yeah.
platform in. Certainly would follow the trend that they've gone down before. But I do think, again, it's I'm glad they raised the concept of crypto agility, and it's something I hope we hear more about from other events we go to.
Likewise.
You have for CISOs, IT leaders to sort of get them along the path, towards being compliant with PQC and actually on a roadmap to success?
Yes, there's a lot of good guidance out there. So first and foremost, I would say just become a little educated yourself. Look at the guides that other organizations have put out about what PQC is, what's the quantum threat. Along with our standards, the federal government has set a timeline of 2035 as the time when the federal government wants to migrate to the new PQC standards. So we want organizations to, follow that same timeline or even sooner if they can. Some things that they can do after education, they need to kind of have a dedicated project, put someone in charge of this, make sure they have resources, that their staff is trained for this.
Have we seen any chief quantum officers yet?
Of that
I was gonna bring that up. I mean, you've got a practitioner background, and we've seen these chief AI officers. I mean, from your perspective, do you think there's going to be a need for a chief quantum officer?
I think probably as a short term thing. Like even with the chief AI officers, I suspect we had chief internet officers at one time.
Yeah.
I suspect 5 years we won't have any chief AI officers because it'll be a standard part of what we do. I think once and here's the rub. It goes back to your time frame question. Well,
yeah,
we do have quantum, like you said, in academia for some of these use cases. The question is when it gets to the point where it can scale across all companies. That's when you see the introduction of a chief quantum officer. But then, once it becomes a little more standardized and ubiquitous, kind of like cloud is today, we don't have chief cloud officers anymore, right?
Right.
So I would think it would be like a temporary 5-year type of job.
Got it.
There are many other layers in other standards organizations as well. So you've got like the IETF that deals with internet protocols. They're taking the algorithms that we've standardized and putting them into some of the internet protocols like TLS and IKE so that they will be used there. There's ISO, the International Standards Organization, that does kind of more global standards.
Too many
and
standards,
putting our NIST algorithms in.
There are,
So
and
we can help
and I
provide
think
guidance, but we're not
there's a high level of education that needs to occur within organizations, right? Because this quantum is so different than classical computing. So I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, there are a lot of infrastructure companies that really focus on training and skilling. Do you think that needs to be a part of the equation that Palo Alto Networks drives?
Yeah, I think eventually. I would think we're a little ahead of the curve right now to do that. Again, if you're working in government or academia, certainly you're learning that on your own. I would think that as it scales, we'd look for the computing vendors to do much of that. But then, you expect the network vendors to help train quantum networking, someone like Palo to help with quantum security. And so I think it does wind up in the specific domains from a training perspective.
Yeah.
Oh yes, I absolutely agree. I think yes. I mean, we still don't hear a lot about quantum computing today. It's still very much this like distant topic. I think for even a lot of enterprise leaders, and organizations more broadly. So I really do want to echo the fact that there's a lot of education. There's actually a lot of market education required, and I don't think a lot of organizations are ready for this. So, but yes, and I think. So what you just mentioned, I do think yes, a lot of network security companies, obviously, that have a lot of market depth in terms of the knowledge and the domain. They have the ability to really lead, and obviously, we've talked about obviously kudos to Palo Alto Networks, but yes, there is a huge reskilling of the new workforce. to really get all of us ready and on the same page, matching towards crypto readiness and just quantum readiness more broadly.
And I do also think that as agentic frameworks continue to mature and become ubiquitous, and companies like Palo Alto Networks solve the whole non-human agent identity sort of access and provisioning, that infrastructure over time is going to become highly automated, right? And there's going to be it's going to take some years because we're still sort of in the early stages of trustworthiness of AI. But I think at some point, much of the infrastructure that you and I cover and that we write about and do video work on is going to be highly automated. So, but quantum I think will be interesting just by the nature of its computational power and all of that.
You'll see that in the ongoing initiatives happening across the government when it relates to modernization initiatives, efficiency efforts. We're seeing that
modernization point that I brought up.
Cryptography is really foundational to security, to mission execution, to public trust. It's the way that we prove identity. It's the way that we protect sensitive data. It's the way that we maintain accountability in the digital environment. And that is really critical for us to be postured in a way to move forward deliberately as a federal government when we're considering PQC readiness moving forward. I'll say that when we look at modernization, if you look at the inverse of your question, modernization without considering PQC readiness or cryptographic agility is really creating technical debt in the future, something that we don't want to see ever. We know that government systems are meant to operate for years, sometimes decades, due to their mission. And the last thing that we would want to do is build or modernize without a consideration for that distant future.
I would argue, Z, that technical debt already exists in a lot of organizations. When you look at just legacy systems and you look at some of the porousness of identity access management, and then you see all of these different companies trying to integrate with one another, and Palo Alto Networks is very different in that regard. Nikesh, and I've spent time with Nikesh. He's really focused on, hey, identity has been very fragmented. When you include IAM and IGA governance and access and data management, and that's what I believe he's trying to do with CyberArk once that acquisition is finalized, is to kind of shore up those issues. But it's interesting that he mentioned that identity is so crucial in all of this as well with post-quantum.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating discussion here with the government because, last year I was talking with Bob Farrell. He's a former CIO, I think, of the Army. He works for WWT today, the systems integrator. And he was saying that right now, the armed forces alone have something like $5 billion in technical debt, right? Wow. And so, this session from the White House has been all about modernization and trying to drive timelines and that. But I think this is going to be one of the things that holds back, quantum, is just the ability to understand your tech debt.
Yeah.
Where certain protocols are being used, right? Like just even understanding where you use RSA or ECC and then being able to modernize from there. So that really held cloud computing back for a long time. In fact, the way a lot of companies handle modernization was they ring fenced the legacy stuff. In fact, I was at an event and I met from the bank. I met the CIO of legacy IT, and he had a counterpart that was cloud. And it's like, that's not a job I'd want.
I wouldn't want that job. I wouldn't want the legacy IT job, would you?
But that was the majority of IT. But I do think it's really an interesting thing to think about, is how we get these government agencies and these big organizations that have relied on their critical infrastructure for years to be able to modernize, right? With all the tech that they have. It's a huge amount.
Yeah. And then, and I think, the industries that are highly regulated, when you look at healthcare with HIPAA compliance, when you look at, financial services with, those regulations as well. I mean, That's where we need to start, right? Because I think that's where the bad actors are really going to focus their efforts on stealing, confidential PII, thwarting, high frequency trading and that sort of thing, trying to corrupt, credit card, processing and that sort of thing for ransomware and that sort of thing. I think those, if you're an organization and you're in one of those very highly regulated industries, you need to be, even thinking much more aggressively. And commercial banking is another one, like you just mentioned. I think they need to be thinking more aggressively about, what they do about, quantum security.
Lots of really, really great conversation. Honestly, really great conversation. I mean, $5 billion, like 5 billion in tech debt is it's wild, and yes, that's pretty wild. And even just to even add, like, yes, governments, and just governmental institutions in general, like, obviously have a significant amount, and it's going to take quite a lot to really do the turnaround. I think from our own SSCR like type vantage point, I would look at it as like three major tech debt, or the kind of relevant to a lot of the crypto conversation, just really built into what you all have mentioned. I think the very first one too is just the hardware debt. Like, as much as we like to always think organizations have modernized and moved to the cloud and all of these things, there are still routers, switches, load balancers, firewalls. Companies are still they still have, that can't run on PQC algorithms, or they might have IoT or OT type devices, that are from like years ago. And I think the problem there is really PQC, algorithms, require more computational overhead, than maybe an RSC or ECDSA. And so there you go. Like, hardware depth is one. Like, how do we completely transform and modernize this infrastructure? I think the second one, obviously, that's possible, is also just architectural depth. We know many monolithic applications, where they might have, where crypto is really just embedded already in the business logic, or some that just don't have that crypto agility, no mechanisms to swap algorithms without completely breaking the system, just because they have these huge embedded systems that they've used from years and years ago, And so I do think one of the challenges you do have, you face with that, is modern systems need to treat cryptography as really a pluggable service, and so it does take a lot. And I think the last one we would also say from our vantage point is just more of the cryptographic depth, which kind of builds on a little bit from what I just talked about early on. So, hard-coded cyber suites in application code that have been written from 15 to 10 years, and maybe they had to be retained because of certain compliance reasons, or certificates with over 10 years of validity periods that still have to be maintained. The challenge, again, to some of the early points I mentioned, migrating to PQC, requires recompiling, retesting, redeploying applications that haven't been touched in years. And so some of these things block a lot of quantum readiness in general. You might even have source code that may be lost, where the original developers may have already left the company from 20 years, to retired from the workforce. However, you need to retransform a lot of these things, or even cipher translation proxies, that let you protect these systems without code changes. You need to recrypt at the network layer to be able to retransform these. So these are some of the hardware depths, the cryptographic depths, and then some of what we've just talked about as it relates to architectural depth. Some of these things as well are going to lead, but there's a lot of work that to what Will and Zeus have mentioned. There's a lot of work to be done.
And I think that resonates with senior. I think it's one thing to say we can set a target date years in the future. We have limited resources and we'll take steps accordingly over time. It's a different story to say you need to be thinking about protecting your assets, protecting your information now, especially that sensitive information that has a long shelf life. How can we take steps now with PQC readiness in mind to know that adversaries, as you mentioned, do not need to have a quantum computer today to do harm now? And this is something that we, from a policy perspective, but also as IT teams across agencies are working deliberately on this.
Thank you for your service. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for what you're doing.
And we look forward to keeping the pedal to the metal on this quantum readiness journey over the months and years to come.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
I really love the diversity of guests and presenters that they've had on this live stream. It's, you know, government.
You guys look like federal guys, though.
Yeah, the G-men.
Yeah.
Its two prime factors. While simple, it has proven highly effective because this calculation is incredibly resource intensive for classical computers. Using sufficiently long key lengths, this problem may take our most powerful supercomputers tens of thousands of years to solve. A quantum computer, however, will be able to solve this calculation quickly and easily, meaning the traditional encryption and digital signature methods we relied on for decades to protect our data will be obsolete. The quantum risk introduces challenges that traditional security was never built for. First, the risk is invisible. Organizations don't know where or how cryptography is used across assets like their infrastructure, their devices, and applications. Second, existing tools can't adapt or protect against quantum-era threats. And finally, legacy systems, operational risks, and skill gaps can delay action.
There's the
This is
skill
more than a
gap,
cryptographic problem.
issue that I brought up. I really think that's going to have to be addressed long term.
Real business risks. Now, our approach is not a single point solution. It's a comprehensive platform-based strategy built upon three key pillars: discover, protect, and accelerate.
Yeah, you can already see the
These
the
innovations
starting
are
point to
strategically
their next
Yeah.
platform, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
entire quantum readiness journey, from initial discovery to full-scale automated defense. It starts with
What is your
continuous
bet?
cryptographic
The company has grown both through acquisition and organic roadmap development. I think it's going to be a combination of the two.
Yeah,
you
I think
think?
there'll be some acquisitions in here though, and but I think it's the same playbook, right? You have to have the visibility to understand what's going on, right? And because data in silos leads to fragmented insights, and so they've tried to roll up or build all the tools they need to see across the attack surface. And so you think about the quantum attack surfaces, and where they don't have product, they'll go buy. I'll be curious to know though if they can actually get off the shelf processors for these, or they got to go build their own chips for this.
That's a good point. I mean, is it going to require custom silicon? It likely will. I mean, you look at the hyperscalers, they're developing their own silicon, and I think if you would have asked AWS or Google a decade ago if they would get into custom silicon, I think they would have rolled their eyes and said no. There are other viable alternatives where we don't have to.
Well, especially once you bring quantum and AI together, and I think those two are a deadly combo, right? It's really a force multiplier of the two, where quantum provides the raw power, but AI provides the smarter way to find it. And so, this is a case where the processors that we have today weren't designed for AI or quantum.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, no, they're designed to support classical computing, right? So I think that's a pretty accurate, prediction that this may drive the birth of a new set of silicon and ASICs and security processors. And you already see a lot of infrastructure providers, that are not beyond the hyperscalers that are developing their own custom silicon. It provides differentiation as well. So yeah, I mean, it'd be probably a pretty solid bet that Palo Alto would follow that sort of same route.
The entire stack moves towards resilience in unison. This isn't a static fix. It is built on the principle of cryptographic agility, giving your enterprise the flexibility to adapt as NIST standards and global regulations continue to evolve. Perhaps the greatest challenge you face as CISOs and CIOs is the legacy anchor, those critical infrastructure that cannot be easily updated. Our cipher translation technology is a fundamental breakthrough. It allows you to bridge the gap between legacy infrastructure and quantum resilience instantly. By deploying cipher translation on your next generation firewalls and Prisma Access, we can translate your pre-quantum vulnerable algorithms to a
Oh,
quantum
there you
secure
go.
session
Yeah.
in real
So
time.
leaning into the company's strength and firewall to create that bridge, right? To do that discovery.
I like the term legacy anchor too. We all have those old apps we're afraid to touch because they'll break. The
Right.
cipher translation tech basically acts as a translator. So the old apps stay the same, but the connection becomes quantum secure. So to me, this is this, I don't mean overly dramatic, but I think for the operational technology folks, this is a lifesaver, right? And so
for sure.
IoT devices don't have the CPU
No.
power to run a lot of the new NIST algorithms, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And they're also typically in OT environments. You've got embedded systems, right?
Yeah.
You have headless, sensors and devices, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is going to be a blessing for anyone that's managing, an operational technology environment.
Yeah.
And and Palo Alto Networks has experience there. They've sort of gone purpose built within certain verticals and certainly manufacturing with a lot of OT. So the company has a history, and so from my perspective has the credibility to be able to go do it across IT and OT. So.
Yeah.
Yes, lots of really great points. I mean, honestly, not too much to add. I mean, I do think I think it was probably just that brought up like the cipher translation proxies, the breakthrough that changes the whole economics here of quantum migration. And I do think generally firewalls like Palo Alto's and what they offer, intercept legacy device traffic already. They could look into weak crypto links, re-encrypt, with PQC for the final destination. And I do think a lot of your existing legacy infrastructures, they almost get a second hand, like organizations now have the ability to modernize cryptography without ripping out some of the working systems, kind of what I talked about a little bit early on, but you kind of could have this ability to seamlessly move from this firewall world to kind of like the quantum readiness. And a lot of it is if you're already running a firewall already, the cipher translation proxies definitely help. So I do agree definitely on that point. I also do think in general, I think another thing Palo Alto has really done is they're going really deep on agentic SecOps at scale. They're going really big, all in on AI. And I do think AI assistants, having AI assistants that automatically recognize legacy systems and can configure cipher translation with less human intervention, which we've seen this with some of what they've done in the Prisma network suite of Palo Alto's network. I think this is very much possible. So I do think this is one of first of many steps, and I also think integration with Palo Alto has their the Cortex XIM, and they're able to very much integrate with the SIEM or CMDB to help correlate cryptographic risk with maybe assets criticality as well. I know that's some developments that Palo Alto Networks has been working on. So I do believe this is the transition we need, and obviously Palo Alto has a lot of those capabilities to support that move, starting from all of their original foundations and the infrastructural technologies they've built historically.
But you see, she's going through the same playbook, right? It's very standard for Palo. Discover, ingest data, right?
Yep.
Present it on a dashboard. But then it helps you see end to end what's going on versus the traditional model of having multiple dashboards, right? Where you're asking the human to be the integration point for all the data. And I've always said when the person's the integration point, it's going to fail. So Palo's done a nice job in the other areas of making that easier for their customers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, their UI is excellent. It's it's intuitive. To your point, you're not having to swivel chair, in a different.
This is a pretty slick interface, though. The
Yeah.
ease of use here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also like how
highest value
the dashboard can be used by a CISO to find what the highest value targets are and where the biggest risks are, but also by the practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing you have a problem is only half the battle. At the platform level, we maintain a live audit-ready cryptographic bill of material. This documents every algorithm, key, and certificate in use at a per asset level, essentially a nutrition label for your network's cryptographic health.
I like that, a nutrition label.
Finally, we must address the reality of the clock. Manual cryptographic migration is mathematically impossible at enterprise scale. Global mandates have set a ticking timeline. Critical assets must be migrated by 2030, with the full transition required by 2035. In this compressed
And she
window,
reinforced the the point that you and I were discussing earlier, that you can't do this manually because of the expanse and just the scale of it all. You're going to have to lean into AI to do this. I mean, the bad actors are leaning into AI. I mean, AI is a double-edged sword. You and I have talked about this on our security podcast a number of times, but it's going to be critical that you deploy automation. Certainly Palo Alto Networks is going to lean into that to drive the automation, drive the remediation.
I do think the other point you made about the 2030, 2035 deadline, it's important to understand the distinction. Right? The 2035 is a hard deadline, but 2030 is when they start deprecating current standards, i.e. marking them unsafe. And so that means in 4 years, our current setup might be considered out of compliance by auditors. And so, as you mentioned, for those highly regulated industries, that's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's the end of the live stream. Z, any final thoughts before we kind of close things out?
Yeah, I think the takeaway here is that quantum security isn't just a math problem for researchers; it's an operational problem for all of us, right? Anybody in the security industry. So we need to find our vulnerable long life data and start demanding crypto agility from our vendors. And that's we got a few years, not an infinite amount of time. But I think if there's one thing the tech industry is guilty of sometimes is we want to lock people into certain solutions, and in this case, customers have to demand agility.
Right. I mean, that's going to be critical, and I'll reiterate, the point that I made earlier. I think 2026 is the year of crypto discovery, and so I think it's going to be incumbent on all organizations to understand the scope, the expanse of the cryptographic assets that they have, inventory that, and then work with companies like Palo Alto Networks to provide, agility, flexibility, incorporate emerging standards, as well as emerging algorithms to support that. And at the end of the day, it's about risk mitigation from my perspective, and building a solid plan to get to, a post-quantum safe world when that quantum computer with the million qubit arrives on the scene. And my prediction is, I'm not a Nobel laureate. My prediction is with AI is going to be a force multiplier. It's going to be here sooner than I think we all think. So,
yeah, and I do think once we're having this problem with AI right now. Well, the way we code, it's for more classical computing. Yeah. And so once we understand the nuances of that from a developer perspective, then you're not going to need as many qubits to do the things that you do today, right? Because we'll be writing things that are uniquely quantum, and that's actually the big distinction Arvind Krishna, CEO of IBM, made at last year's Think. Is we have quantum computers that are able to do certain things. We're solving them in a classical computing way, though, not a uniquely quantum way, and that's the bridge that's got to get across now.
Yeah, I agree. Well, hey, my friend, it's always good to chat about tech and share insights, and it's been another great conversation.
This was really great, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having SSCR. I do believe this is a really, really, really important and crucial topic, and I really want to say thank you as well for Palo Alto Networks for even just raising awareness on quantum readiness. I think this is a very important topic, and just wanted to commend everyone, and Will and Zeus folks for joining and doing this together.
Yeah, and I applaud Palo Alto Networks for putting on this live stream just to raise the level of awareness and visibility for the need to start thinking about this now, because it's coming very quickly.
Yeah, it was great that it was so thought leadership in nature too, right? There was a little bit of product at the end, but what I think the industry needs is a lot of that thought leadership to help move it forward. But I'd encourage everyone, like I said, click on the link or reach out to Will and I. You can find us both on LinkedIn.